I just want you to listen to a piece of audio. I know this is TV. We're supposed to work in pictures, but I've never been great at that. Listen to this audio clip. Tell me who the speaker is. That's going to be kind of easy. But also tell me roughly when you think the speaker said this. All right, listen.
The problem that we have nationally in this country is that the two-party system, dominated by big money, is not delivering for ordinary people, which is why people are giving up on the political process, why they're not voting, and why there is a great deal of anger and frustration at the political system as it now exists.
All right. Who is it? Not that hard. The distinctive Brooklyn accent gives away pretty easily that that is none other than Bernie Sanders. But if you thought that was a line from this year, if you thought that was some recent campaign interview Bernie Sanders gave in Iowa or New Hampshire or something, you would be wrong about that. Because what you just heard is from an interview that happened 26 years ago.
Mayor Bernard Sanders of Burlington, Vermont. How does a socialist like yourself keep winning elections in a country we generally consider that has a two-party system?
Well, I think we win in Burlington. I should point out that in Burlington, I am the mayor, and I've won on 4 occasions, but we have 13 people on our city council, our board of aldermen, and 6 of them are progressive, so it's not just me. We have probably the only strong 3-party city in the United States of America. And I think the reason that we win and continue to win is that increasingly people are frustrated and angry about a two-party system which is dominated by big money and which does not pay attention to the needs of working people or elderly people or poor people. And I think if you talk common sense to the people and you say the government is supposed to represent the needs of those people who today are not getting a fair shake, you know what? They'll vote for you. And the problem that we have nationally in this country is that the two-party system, dominated by big money, is not delivering for ordinary people, which is why people are giving up on the political process, why they're not voting, and why there is a great deal of anger and frustration at the political system as it now exists.
That was an interview that Bernie Sanders gave to C-SPAN all the way back in 1989 when he was the mayor of tiny Burlington, Vermont. But the themes that he hit in that interview, those are exactly the same themes that he is now campaigning on for president nearly 30 years later. Bernie Sanders has been on the national stage for more than 3 decades. And maybe more than anybody else, he has held and espoused the exact same beliefs. He has been driven by the exact same issues all that time. And because he is a freaking socialist, and he has called himself that for a very long time, not freaking, but socialist, because of that, he has been a consistent source of fascination for the national media. Bernie Sanders was first elected mayor in Burlington, Vermont in 1981. Then he was re-elected a few years later. Then he was re-elected again a few years later. And by then, this guy who was apparently not a fluke in this city in Vermont, he did start to get noticed nationwide.
New England has a tradition of political independence going all the way back to the Boston Tea Party. And in Burlington, Vermont tonight, one very independent Yankee is being sworn in for his 3rd term as mayor. Tradition or no, Fred Briggs reports that some New Englanders find Bernard Sanders astonishing.
They laughed at Bernie Sanders when he ran for mayor, not just because he was a brash outsider from Brooklyn, neither Republican nor Democrat, but because he was an avowed socialist, still is.
To us, what socialism means basically is democracy. It's a society in which you don't have a handful of giant banks and corporations controlling the economic and political life of the nation.
Burlington, on the eastern shore of Lake Champlain, was best known as the biggest of Vermont's small towns and home of the University of Vermont. Then came IBM with 8,000 employees, General Electric, high-tech yuppies, and what a political scientist calls MARPies, middle-aged rural professionals, people who gave up big city money to enjoy Vermont's small-town way of life. These voters weren't ready to elect the safe, conservative kind of mayor Burlington had been accustomed to for 2 centuries, but a socialist like Bernie Sanders? The establishment, or what used to be the establishment here, thought that that first victory was a fluke. And even though Sanders has won twice since 1981, the old guard still can't quite believe that Burlington isn't what it used to be. A lot of new buildings now and a lot of old buildings gentrified into fern bars and boutiques. Unemployment down to 3%. And the ultimate sign of a boom, no place to park downtown. Sanders has raised corporate property taxes, would like to impose new taxes on the wealthy. Sanders has a foreign policy, anti-nuclear, anti-intervention. Burlington has even adopted a sister city in Nicaragua. That riles the establishment.
Quite frankly, he should be spending his time dealing with the problems of the city of Burlington and not getting involved in national politics.
We say, don't spend our money invading Nicaragua where the people there are trying to establish their own life. Give us a break. Give us some money for our cities and towns to lower property taxes.
The establishment wishes he wore neckties, but it knows he won't. Someday, the opposition will try to recapture City Hall, but more than half the voters like it the way it is and tend to think that Bernie Sanders, as much as the boom, put Burlington on the map. Fred Briggs, NBC News, Burlington, Vermont.
I wonder if he still has that sweater. That was April 1985. That was when the national media started to discover this eccentric, confident, curly-haired socialist mayor from Burlington, Vermont. For a while, Bernie Sanders was just sort of an object of national media fascination. Hey, are we doing a piece about all the yuppies from the cities moving to New England? Call that socialist mayor guy.
Rolling, rural, rustic, and removed. For many, Vermont is state of mind as well as a state of the union, luring thousands from New York, from Boston, from a nation that seems too much in a hurry.
They want to live slow, they want to live quiet, they want to go to town meeting. They're trying to escape the fast lane and live the good life.
Frank Bryan, political science professor, Vermont native, practitioner of hardscrabble life in the country, and co-author of a tongue-in-cheek book called Real Vermonters Don't Milk Goats. Nor do they drive Volvos, according to Bryan, and would never be seen with this on their bumper. So what do real Vermonters do?
They want to do what they damn well please, and they'll let you do what you damn well please, as long as you don't interfere with them.
This is the kind of town most people would assume to be quintessential Vermont. So let's assume that it looks the way it always did, and that the people here think the way they always did. But here and elsewhere, inroads from the outside world. Videos in the village store, cafes and former cornfields, factory outlets and farm towns. More than half the new immigrants live in Burlington, Vermont's largest city. Most adapted, but some didn't, wanted Vermont to adapt to them. That worries Bernie Sanders, who came here from Brooklyn and has been mayor 6 years.
The people come up who are all so smart, they know so much, and they want to show us how we could be just like they were back home. Unfortunately, they left back home because they didn't like it back home.
Bernie Sanders, 1987 in that clip, defending the way of life of small-town Vermont. But around that time, Bernie Sanders also started to show some political ambitions beyond just being a small-town mayor. Around that time, he ran for a seat in Vermont for the next 16 years. He was reelected to the House 7 times. He then ran for the U.S. Senate in Vermont. And you know that he won. But do you know that he won by more than 30 points in that race? And Bernie Sanders has used his position in Congress, his national platform in Congress and in the Senate, to push for, honestly, the exact same issues that he pushed for decades earlier in Vermont. I mean, Mayor Bernie Sanders, for instance, traveled to Nicaragua in the 1980s to argue against Ronald Reagan's military adventurism in Latin America. Well, here's how Congressman Bernie Sanders responded to the military adventurism of a new Republican president decades later in 2002.
Good evening. President Bush today sent to Congress a 2-page indictment of Saddam Hussein and asked Congress to approve a tough resolution that authorizes the U.S. to disarm Iraq, which would lead to the overthrow of Saddam Hussein by all means necessary. On Capitol Hill, reaction to the proposed resolution was mostly positive, with a sprinkling of loud protests that the administration is way off course. Here's NBC's Lisa Myers.
But rather our last
Today, for the first time, Congress's anti-war movement mobilized, launching an extraordinary broadside against the president.
The president of the United States will lie to the American people in order to get us into this war. Our moral authority will be shot. We are leading to international anarchy. Any country at any time, for any reason, can attack another country.
As you might imagine, he voted against the invasion of Iraq in 2002. He voted no with an exclamation point. But it has been his economic message. It's been his message that corporations and the banks and the wealthy are piling up too much power and influence, that the political system is rigged in favor of the wealthy. It's that economic message that he espoused when he was just the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, doing C-SPAN call-in shows. It is that unbelievably consistent, nuts and bolts populist message that has put Bernie Sanders in the national spotlight Since he's been a national figure, it led to an 8.5-hour-long pseudo-filibuster on the Senate floor against the Bush tax cuts in 2010. Now it's leading to Bernie Sanders absolutely packing stadiums and venues across the country this summer as he campaigns for president. Larger crowds than any other candidate in either party by a mile. The Bernie for President campaign, as impossible as it would have been to imagine even a year ago. Bernie for President! You couldn't imagine it a year ago, let alone 30 years ago. But his campaign is energizing liberals in the blue states and in the red states. And he's doing it in big numbers as he attempts to pull off what is still thought of as a basically impossible task, the task of knocking Hillary Clinton off the top of the Democratic field. What Bernie Sanders is trying to do right now, his message across the country, really is the exact same undiluted message you could have seen coming from him if you had kept an eye out fully 3 decades ago for what was going to happen next.
I would like to see somebody who speaks for the underdog, for the people who don't have decent health care benefits, somebody who understands that in America today 50% of the people don't even vote anymore, and the vast majority of that 50% are poor people and working people who have given up on the system. So essentially I would like to see a candidate who has the guts to have a vision that America could be a land for all people, not just the land controlled by the super rich.